My next guest is the litigation counsel for the new Civil Liberties Alliance. Her name is Jenin Younes, and she joins us tonight from our nation's capital. Jenin, welcome back. I know you and Andrew talk often. Um, we make fun of California a lot, and they kind of deserve to be made fun of. They pulled out of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, so they're not watching for any terrorists in their state. They've opened up everything to be a completely open state. You literally could bring any type of disease, drug, violence possible into California, and they would just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, okay, come on in. But every now and then, and it is a rare thing, a judge sometimes puts a little hand slap on Mr. Newsom. What did they do this time?
So, California came up with this sort of ridiculous law that punished doctors for spreading misinformation to patients about COVID. And
Wait,
misinformation.
stop. Nope, stop right there. So Gavin Newsom and a bunch of boneheads over at the state Senate get to tell doctors what misinformation is? Is that what was
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah, exactly. And the law itself is actually full of its own misinformation. Like vaccinated people are 11 times less likely to die of COVID than unvaccinated, which is just not true. And it's a ridiculous law, and they define misinformation in this sort of way that makes no sense. False information that's contradicted by the scientific consensus, contrary to the standard of care. It was clearly, if you look at the legislative record, it's clear that the point of this law is to silence doctors who don't agree with the state on COVID-related matters. So we raised challenges to the law, including due process and First Amendment, and we actually won 2 weeks ago.
And this was at the lowest level in the court system. Are
That's right.
they intending on appealing and challenging you again?
No, so this gets a little complicated, and hopefully I won't bore people too much, but they have actually said, very surprisingly, that they're not appealing it, which is highly unusual. But there's another case that lost slightly before us, and the plaintiffs there are appealing. So I think that the state might think they're in a stronger position if they're going up on their own win, as opposed to our case where they're going up on a loss. So I think that might be why they're not appealing.
Can your loss be used? I mean, can your win be used as precedent by the judge that hears the other case?
So no, because it's a lower court, but it can be persuasive. And in fact, I'm supporting the other case in what's called an amicus brief. So just writing a brief basically saying we're not a party, but we have an interest and we support the plaintiffs. And so we use a lot of the reasoning because he had better reasoning. So
Yeah. Well, it is really astounding. And I'm not a medical professional. I have a lot of doctors on my show. And for the last couple of years, it was interesting in the early going because most of them aligned themselves with NIH, CDC, NSAID, whatever the thing that Fauci was over, et cetera. And they said, we gotta, yeah, they're asking us to follow good protocol. But then there was that little parting of the ways. Just CDC came off a little bit from the science, and the doctors that I was talking to were like, yeah, that's not, no. And then they started asking for data from the studies and from the different groups like Pfizer and others that were releasing information on the vaccine and so forth. And by the time we got to the end of COVID, they were literally on different planets from where they started. And if you squelch doctors for the purpose of politics, you are a public danger to America. I'm sorry, Gavin Newsom, the dunderheads in the Senate and the House, you pass this law and you say you know better than the doctors? Shame on you.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what the point of the First Amendment is, right? Like that we're not supposed to be shutting people up because they disagree with the state. So it's really shocking to me that so many Americans in this day and age don't seem to understand that. And, another point I think that's worth making is even if that you could have something, even if you could determine what a scientific consensus on these subjects was, which is somewhat ridiculous, there was an apparent consensus that didn't actually exist because doctors who disagreed, scientists who disagreed, were silenced by the media, as we now know more and more. So people who disagreed with lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine mandates were shut up and were, just called crazy and fringe and that sort of thing.
Well, and you noticed blue state governors, and I think Newsom did it, but I know that Cuomo did it here in New York. They not only shut down, but then they took all of the means of treatments out of the hands of the personal physicians. Right. What we should have done from the beginning of the pandemic was say, consult with your doctor, talk to him about the different therapies that are there. Trust his knowledge of your case, your body, your diseases over, Fauci or Cuomo or anybody else. But Cuomo wouldn't let therapeutics be distributed to local doctors. They couldn't prescribe them. You had to go to the emergency room. And guess what happened when you went to the emergency room? You got exposed to about 50,000 people that had been in and out of there with COVID in the last few days. And the worst ones that went there to get the therapeutics oftentimes got the COVID and died because they had to go to the hospital.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you look and this idea that doctors have to just parrot the state's line or the CDC's line is utterly absurd. And it takes away the point of doctors. You know, if you go to the doctor, which I've done before, and I've said, I looked my symptoms up on the internet and I think I have X, Y, or Z. They're like, no, don't do that. You know, you're not supposed to get medical treatment via the internet. You go to your doctor to get personalized advice. They look at your whole situation. And that's the case here. You know, it's not the case that everyone or no one should get the vaccine. It's the case that it's an individualized risk assessment depending on your age, whether you've had COVID, et cetera. But this wants to take this out of the individual's hands and out of the doctor's hands to make individualized recommendations.
Well, and so let's take a look at the landscape here, Jenin, because you won your case. This other case is on appeal. We've seen in other cases the higher courts backing. For instance, they struck down mandate laws and said that wasn't constitutional. Some people are getting their jobs back, some with back pay. A lot of the people in the government jobs still aren't being allowed to do that yet, including our military. But what do you think is the next horizon for the fight for, fair and free information?
Well, that's a good question. I have a couple of other cases that are sort of related, and they have to do with the government's involvement in big tech censorship. So the federal government especially has been telling social media companies to censor people. My clients are mostly scientists and doctors who, again, oppose the government COVID restrictions, and they were silenced on social media. They were often kicked off or their posts were censored. So I think this is a very important issue, and we're sort of starting to learn the extent of the government's involvement here, but I think it'll be a long fight.
Have we learned anything in the hearings that have transpired so far on Capitol Hill the last couple of days with the big tech people in there under testimony?
So a lot of the stuff that came to light has actually come to light through one of our lawsuits, Missouri.
Nice.
Yeah. So I knew most of it, but essentially what's been going on is the CDC, people in the White House, especially once Biden took over, the CDC's involvement actually goes back prior to that. DHS have been basically very...
We're going to have to run, Jenin. Great job. Congrats on the big win. We'll talk to you down the road.